In previous lessons, we reviewed while loops and for loops as a way to perform counter-controlled iteration statements. Now, let's talk about one more way to iterate using a counter. Do-while loops are very similar to while loops. In this instance, we will again create an application with a counter that will iterate 10 times. After we do this, however, I will discuss one caveat regarding do-while loops that you will need to be aware of if you use them in the future. Let's begin by declaring a counter variable. It will be called myCounter and it will be set to 0. Now, let's build the do-while loop. First, write the word do. After that, create an open and closing bracket. This will be the contents of the loop. After the closing bracket, write a while statement as you did before. First, the word while, and then a condition within parentheses. Please note there should be a semicolon after the while statement in a do-while loop. Here, our condition will be myCounter is less than 10. If you want to add a comment here, you might consider using the multi-line comment statement. This will ensure the complete line is not commented out. Now, in the do-while block, let's write the value of myCounter to the screen. Finally, let's increment myCounter by 1. Let's now run the application. As you can see, just like previous examples, we wrote the value of myCounter to the screen 10 times, starting with 0 up into 9. It's important to note that in a do-while loop, the condition evaluates at the end of each iteration. This means, unlike a while loop, the loop will execute one time whether or not the condition is met. Let's use an example where a while loop differs from a do-while loop. We have a counter variable here equal to 0. Let's change that to 1. Let's now write a while loop that only executes if myCounter is less than 1. In this, we will write the value of myCounter to the screen. We will then increment myCounter by 1. If we were looking at this code, we would say our counter variable is initialized to 1. We then hit a while loop where the condition of the while loop is only execute while my counter is less than 1. If we plug in the value 1 for my counter, the statement that will be evaluated first is 1 less than 1. That statement evaluates to false. That means this block will never execute. Let's run this application. As you can see here, that held true. Nothing was written to the screen. Again, in a do-while loop, unlike a while loop, the condition is evaluated at the end of the first iteration. So let's turn this into a do-while loop. We will replace this while statement with the word do. We will move the while statement to the end of the block. Now, the first time we hit the block, this will execute the contents of the block. Then, the condition will be evaluated after the first time the block is run. This means, even though the statement down at the bottom, 1 is less than 1, evaluates to false, that statement isn't evaluated until after we've written to the console for the first time and incremented the counter. That means by the time we evaluate this, the statement will read, while my counter, which is 2, is less than 1. 2 is less than 1 evaluates to false. The program will then end. In this case, we should see that the value 1 will be written to the screen, followed by nothing else. Let's run the application. As you can see here, the value 1 was written to the console and nothing else was written. Again, when choosing between while loops and do while loops, it's important to remember that the first evaluation of the condition occurs only after the loop executes for the first time. If in your pseudocode you are depending upon the fact that the condition is evaluated before the loop executes the first time, consider using a while loop. If that is not necessary, a do while loop may fit your needs.